Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. On a secluded island in Fiji lies a luxurious resort, a paradise with white sandy beaches, warm Pacific waters, and the perfect setting for a honeymoon. This was the dream destination for newlyweds Christy and Bradley Dawson, who planned to spend some of the happiest days of their lives there. But on the morning of July 9th, 2022, the tranquility of this tropical retreat was shattered by an unsettling discovery. Hotel staff noticed that the guests in bungalow number 11 hadn't shown up for breakfast. Their villa door remained shut, and the "Do Not Disturb" sign still hung on the handle. When one of the employees finally opened the door, they were met with a sight no one expected in such a place. That same day, on a neighboring island, a man was found wandering. He was barefoot, dressed in dirty clothes, and looked completely exhausted. As he stumbled along the shore, he kept repeating the same phrase. "We just had an argument." What really happened that night? How did a picture-perfect vacation turn into a nightmare? And most importantly, what was Bradley Dawson hiding? Bradley Dawson was born in 1984 in a middle-class suburb of Chicago. His early years seemed ordinary: a stable home, school, and a passion for technology. However, from a young age, he stood out for his reserved nature. Bradley preferred solitude, rarely interacted with peers, and spent much of his time on computers, fascinated by programming and electronics. His parents simply saw him as an introvert and didn't find this concerning. In school, he was quiet, avoided conflicts, and stayed away from large social gatherings. Teachers praised his focus and logical thinking, but he remained distant in social interactions. During his teenage years, he kept a small circle of acquaintances and avoided unnecessary attention. After high school, Bradley enrolled in a university majoring in information technology. Academics came easily to him, and he decided to pursue a career in the IT field. After graduation, he landed a job at a major company developing software. But after a few years, he realized that corporate life didn't suit him. The rigid hierarchy and monotony of office work quickly became tiresome, pushing him to seek a different path. Wanting a job with more social impact, he joined a nonprofit organization that assisted young people dealing with emotional and behavioral challenges. To outsiders, it looked like an act of altruism, but co-workers noticed that Bradley remained detached and showed little enthusiasm. He performed his duties diligently, but without genuine interest, treating the position more as a career move than a personal calling. Bradley had always been reserved when it came to his personal life. For years, his relationships were short-lived, and it wasn't until 2019 that he took a serious step, getting married. However, the marriage didn't last long. 3 years later, the couple divorced. The reasons for their split were never publicly discussed, and Bradley avoided talking about it. Friends speculated that his introverted nature and struggles with emotional intimacy might have played a role. After the divorce, he didn't pursue new relationships, remaining an enigma to those around him, polite and unassuming on the surface, yet distant and difficult to read. Over time, unsettling details from his past began to emerge. People who knew him recalled that Bradley had a tendency to be controlling in relationships, though it wasn't always obvious at first. One of the most detailed accounts came from Kristen Becker, a woman he dated in college. After the tragic events, she gave an interview, sharing her memories of their relationship. According to her, Bradley initially seemed caring and attentive, but over time he started displaying possessive behavior. He asked too many questions about her whereabouts, checked her messages, and tried to limit her social interactions. Their arguments became frequent. While he didn't resort to physical aggression right away, his temper surfaced in smaller ways: cutting remarks, manipulative comments, and subtle pressure. Kristen also recalled one particular incident that served as a red flag for her. During one of their arguments, when she decided to end the relationship, Bradley lost control of his emotions. As she was leaving his apartment, he caught up with her and pushed her onto the bed. She wasn't physically harmed, but the moment was enough to solidify her decision. After that, Kristen cut ties with him completely. At the time, she didn't go to law enforcement or share the experience with friends, but it left a lasting mark on her memory. This incident remained buried in the past, never officially documented. Bradley had no criminal record and had never been held accountable for aggressive behavior. To most people, He was still just a quiet, introverted programmer working at a non-profit organization. But behind the composed and logical exterior was someone who struggled with anger issues, displayed controlling tendencies, and avoided expressing emotions openly. For a long time, these traits went unnoticed by those around him. Christy Chen was born in 1985 in Boulder, Colorado, into a loving and supportive family. She was the only daughter of Tao and Xia Chen, who provided her with everything she needed for a happy upbringing. Her father, a successful entrepreneur, ensured financial stability and comfort, while her mother, an energetic and curious woman, encouraged Christy to explore the world and find her own path. Xia Chen instilled a love for travel in her daughter from an early age. Together, they visited numerous countries, explored different cultures, and created cherished memories. Every trip strengthened their bond and taught valuable life lessons. These experiences played a significant role in shaping Christy's character. She grew up to be bold, determined, and deeply compassionate. After finishing high school, she decided to follow a path that aligned with her creative nature. From childhood, Christy had been passionate about cooking, spending countless hours in the kitchen with her mother. What started as a hobby gradually turned into a true calling, and over time, she fulfilled her dream by opening her own bakery in Colorado. Her business quickly became a success. Christy didn't just sell desserts. Each creation was a small work of art. She wanted every treat to bring joy to people, and her sincerity resonated with customers. Her bakery earned a great reputation in the city, and she became well known in her community for her unique recipes and genuine care for her clients. But even after reaching success, Christy never stopped seeking new challenges. A few years later, she realized she wanted to shift gears and pursue something more meaningful. Since childhood, she had been drawn to the medical field, and the idea of helping people had never left her mind. Eventually, this desire grew so strong that she made a life-changing decision. She sold her bakery and enrolled in pharmacy school. The coursework was demanding, requiring her full dedication, but Christy had never been afraid of hard work. Thanks to her perseverance and discipline, she successfully graduated and earned her pharmacy degree. Shortly after, she joined one of the country's largest pharmacy chains, where she quickly gained the respect of both colleagues and customers. She was valued for her professionalism, attentiveness, and sincere desire to help each person she encountered. Her career was going well, but Christy had always dreamed of having a strong, loving family. Growing up in a household filled with warmth and understanding, her parents had set the example of a harmonious relationship, and she believed she could build something similar. Despite the stability in her life, she longed for a reliable partner to share her future with. That fateful meeting happened unexpectedly in November 2021. A friend invited her to a bachelorette party, and though Christy had no plans of meeting anyone that night, fate had other ideas. Among the guests was Bradley Dawson, a reserved and somewhat withdrawn man who had come as a +1 of a friend. In the lively crowd, his quiet demeanor and calm presence stood out. This immediately caught Christy's attention. She had a talent for recognizing depth where others only saw the surface. Their conversation started by chance when they found themselves standing next to each other at the bar. What began as small talk quickly turned into a lively discussion. They soon realized they had a lot in common. Both were originally from Chicago, supported the same baseball team, and enjoyed running. But what impressed Christy the most was the fact that Bradley worked at a non-profit organization helping young people with emotional and behavioral challenges. This shared sense of purpose and values created an instant connection between them. After the bachelorette party, they continued talking. At first, it was just texts and messages, then frequent phone calls, and soon, in-person meetings. The more Christy got to know Bradley, the more she believed she had found someone she could truly build a future with. He seemed reliable, attentive, and caring. Exactly the kind of partner she had always dreamed of. Their relationship moved quickly. Just 3 months after meeting in February 2022, they got married. They bought a cozy home in Memphis, planning to build a life together. To outsiders, their marriage seemed perfect, but problems began to emerge not long after the wedding. Bradley, who had initially appeared thoughtful and kind, turned out to have a temper. He had a tendency to be controlling and jealous, which created tension in their relationship. Christy, who had always valued her independence, started noticing that her husband would get irritated over small things, tried to limit her interactions with friends, and became distant after arguments. They frequently disagreed, especially over day-to-day issues and their differences in personality. Christy was open and expressive, comfortable sharing her emotions, while Bradley preferred to avoid discussing problems or reacted with sudden outbursts of frustration. Sometimes, their arguments would escalate to the point where Christy needed to leave the house to give them both space. But soon after, Bradley would come back with apologies, promises, and gifts, and she convinced herself that things would improve. One of the biggest concerns among Christy's friends was how quickly she had married Bradley. Many pointed out that 3 months wasn't enough time to truly know someone before making such a major commitment. But Christy believed she had found the right person. Perhaps she simply hadn't had enough time to recognize the warning signs before their relationship became serious. Another issue that surfaced was Bradley's drinking. He consumed alcohol more often than Christy felt was reasonable, and when he drank, his mood shifted unpredictably. Sometimes he became overly cheerful and relaxed, but other times his attitude turned hostile. These moments unsettled Christy, but she rationalized them as a result of stress or exhaustion. As a special gift for their daughter's honeymoon, Christy's parents decided to surprise the newlyweds with a luxurious trip to Fiji. They chose one of the most romantic destinations on Earth, Turtle Island, a place they had once visited themselves. It was an expensive trip, but they spared no expense for their beloved daughter. Christy had been looking forward to the vacation. She believed that spending time together in such a beautiful setting would strengthen her relationship with Bradley and help them move past the small disagreements that had started to surface in their daily lives. No one could have predicted that this romantic getaway would mark the beginning of the end. In July 2022, Christy and Bradley embarked on their long-awaited honeymoon. Turtle Island was unlike typical tourist resorts. It was a secluded paradise with crystal-clear waters, white sandy beaches, and dense tropical greenery. The island had only 14 villas, each designed to give guests complete privacy. The resort was adults only, making it a popular choice for honeymooners. Every guest was assigned a personal attendant to cater to their every need. Their villa sat right on the water's edge, with a hammock on the spacious terrace and breathtaking views of the endless blue lagoon. Christy was thrilled, and Bradley seemed content as well. He appreciated the peace and seclusion, a welcome escape from the hustle of daily life. The first days of their honeymoon felt like a dream. The couple enjoyed nature and each other's company, strolling along the beach, having romantic sunset dinners, indulging in spa treatments, and kayaking through the serene waters. Christy shared photos with her parents, telling them how happy she was. It seemed as though her dream of a carefree vacation with the man she loved had finally come true. Bradley was fully engaged in Christy's plans, excited to explore the island, and even suggested a spontaneous yacht trip one afternoon. Their days were filled with harmony, and there was no sign of trouble ahead. But on the evening of July 8th, an event took place that would change everything. The couple attended an event called Family Fun Night, a casual gathering with cocktails, live music, and dancing. The atmosphere was lighthearted and social, with guests chatting, dancing, and enjoying the evening. At first, Christy felt at ease. She mingled with other guests and soaked in the festive mood while Bradley stepped away to get drinks. When he returned, he seemed relaxed. But as the night went on and he had more cocktails, his demeanor changed. He became increasingly talkative and uninhibited. Eventually, Christy noticed that he was paying particular attention to a young woman from a nearby villa. At first, it seemed completely harmless. Just a few polite exchanges, a couple of jokes. But as the conversation went on, Bradley became increasingly engaged, seeming to forget Christy was even there. He laughed, gestured animatedly, and the interaction between him and the woman took on a light, effortless rhythm. Christy watched with growing frustration. The turning point came when Bradley invited the woman to dance. For a few minutes, Christy tried to ignore it, but when she realized her husband was openly flirting, she couldn't stay silent any longer. She approached him, her voice calm but firm, and asked him to come back to their table. Bradley, however, reacted with irritation. His tone sharpened, and instead of stopping, he simply ignored her request. Several guests noticed the tension between them as Christy tried once again to pull him aside. The argument flared up instantly. Their voices grew louder despite Christy's attempts to stay composed. She confronted Bradley about his behavior, while he shot back in frustration, accusing her of overreacting. Their exchange caught the attention of nearby guests. Christy suggested they leave to avoid making a scene. Bradley, still agitated, reluctantly agreed. Under the curious glances of other guests, they left the party and headed toward the beach. The argument continued as they moved away from the crowd. Later, some tourists recalled hearing muffled shouting as the couple walked down the path. Their voices grew more intense. One guest distinctly remembered hearing a sudden, heavy thud, like something falling or furniture being knocked over. Then, an eerie silence followed. No one intervened. Privacy was highly valued at the resort, and most assumed it was just a typical marital disagreement. Still, a few witnesses admitted to feeling uneasy. On the morning of July 9th, a staff member at Turtle Island Resort, responsible for housekeeping, approached the bungalow where Christy and Bradley Dawson were staying. The Do Not Disturb sign still hung on the door, just as it had the night before. This was unusual. By that time, most guests were already up, either having breakfast or heading out for morning activities. The staff member knocked several times, but there was no response. He listened closely, but the villa was completely silent. After waiting a moment longer, he carefully used his key to unlock the door and stepped inside. The room was eerily silent, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. It seemed as though no one had moved inside for hours. At first glance, everything appeared normal. The bed was neatly made, belongings were in place, and the suitcases remained unpacked. Yet an unsettling feeling lingered. As the staff member stepped further inside, his eyes caught something faint on the floor. Dark, barely visible stains leading toward the bathroom. His heart began to race. Taking a few cautious steps, he peered inside and froze in shock. Christy lay motionless on the cold bathroom tiles near the toilet. She was wearing a nightgown, crumpled and stained. Her face was almost unrecognizable, covered in deep bruises. Her lips were swollen and split, and dark swelling had formed beneath her eyes. A jagged wound marked her forehead. Nearby, the toilet tank lid lay on the floor, cracked. Blood spatter on the walls and floor suggested multiple impacts. But the most chilling detail was her posture. She hadn't simply fallen. Her body was curled inward, as if she had instinctively tried to shield herself in her final moments. Her knees were drawn toward her chest, and one arm was raised protectively over her head. The stunned staff member stood frozen for a moment before sprinting toward the resort's front desk, gasping for breath as he tried to explain what he had just seen. Resort employees immediately secured the bungalow and contacted law enforcement. 2 hours later, authorities arrived on the island. The medical examiner's assessment confirmed what many had already feared. Christy had suffered a fatal blow to the head from a heavy object. However, the injuries made it clear that this hadn't been a single strike, but rather a series of repeated, forceful blows. She hadn't lost consciousness right away. She had fought back, but the struggle had been overwhelmingly one-sided. The forensic findings became key evidence. This was no accident. Her body remained in the exact position it had been found. There had been no attempt to cover up what had happened. Further examination revealed scratches and abrasions on her arms and shoulders. Under her fingernails, investigators found microscopic traces of skin, a sign that she had fought desperately in her final moments. But the biggest question remained: where was Bradley? Resort staff were certain that he had been on the island the night before, but by the time law enforcement arrived, he was nowhere to be found. As officers searched the bungalow, they discovered his belongings. His phone and smartwatch were on the bedside table. His clothes were neatly folded, and his suitcase stood in the corner. It looked as if he had simply stepped out for a moment. However, there was one alarming detail. His passport and wallet were missing. That was the first red flag. During the search of the area, one of the resort employees informed the police of another strange discovery. One of the kayaks was missing from the beach. This only strengthened the investigators' theory. Bradley had likely used the kayak to escape from the island overnight. But after that, his trail disappeared. A place once known for its peace and exclusivity had suddenly become the center of a crime investigation. Guests were in shock, and resort staff struggled to process what had happened. Turtle Island, a sanctuary for privacy and relaxation, was now the site of an unfolding mystery. one no one had been prepared for. Authorities immediately contacted the Coast Guard and local police on nearby islands, launching a search for Bradley. Had he drowned? Had he managed to reach land? Was he still hiding somewhere on the island? There were no answers yet. The search for Bradley Dawson began the moment Christy's body was discovered. Law enforcement officers and resort staff combed the island, but there was no sign of him. The only lead remained the missing kayak. Investigators believed Bradley had fled the island by boat during the night, but where he had gone was unknown. Turtle Island was surrounded by miles of open water. He could have tried to paddle to a neighboring island, or, if he had miscalculated his strength, he might not have made it at all. The Fiji Coast Guard and local police immediately sent urgent alerts to all nearby outposts. Authorities decided to scan the coastline and follow up on any reports of an unfamiliar man appearing in the area. At around 3 p.m., a call came into the police station on a nearby island. A local resident, Manau Ratule, reported seeing a disoriented man on the beach. His clothes were covered in sand and dirt, his body was scratched and bruised, and he was speaking incoherently, repeating the same phrase over and over. "We just had an argument." Officers immediately arrived at the scene and quickly confirmed the identity of the man they had found. It was Bradley Dawson. At the time of his discovery, he was in an extremely weakened state. His movements were sluggish, his face gaunt, and he looked as though he had gone hours without food or water, aimlessly wandering along the shoreline. His clothes were damp, and his arms and legs were covered in scratches, suggesting he had made his way through dense brush or over coral reefs. The police asked him several questions, but Bradley's responses were disjointed. He stammered, struggled to form coherent sentences, and often hesitated. When asked what had happened that night, he repeatedly muttered the same phrase, "We just had an argument." When an investigator asked where Christy was, Bradley froze for several seconds before replying, "I left when she fell asleep." He was clearly in a state of shock, but that did not change the fact that he needed to be taken into custody. Bradley was transported to a police station on the island of Viti Levu. A few hours later, he gave his first official statement. He claimed that he and Christy had indeed argued, after which he decided to go for a walk to cool off. According to him, when he left the bungalow, Christy was still alive. Investigators were immediately suspicious. First, if he had simply gone for a walk, why had he taken a kayak and left the island? And second, why hadn't he tried to return in the morning? Despite the inconsistencies in his story, Bradley stuck to his version. He insisted that he hadn't planned to flee, but had only wanted to be alone. However, after panicking about the argument, he decided to leave the island. Later, after consulting with an attorney, Bradley began altering his statements. He retracted his original claim about the argument and started saying that he couldn't recall the details of that night. When asked why he had left the island, he refused to answer. At that moment, it became clear to the police Bradley Dawson was their prime suspect. Following his arrest and shifting statements, preparations for the trial began. Charges against him were filed immediately. Fijian prosecutors treated the case as a criminal act of the highest severity. The wait for the trial was long, and in the meantime, Bradley remained in custody without bail. Christy's family demanded the harshest possible sentence. Losing their only daughter was a devastating blow they could never recover from. Her father, Tao Chen, made it clear from the beginning that he would not rest until Bradley received a life sentence. Her mother, Xia Chen, openly stated in interviews that this man had stolen their purpose in life, and they would fight for justice to the very end. Prosecutors built their case around the collected evidence. One of the strongest pieces of proof came from the medical examiners. The autopsy revealed that Christy had suffered multiple blunt force injuries to her head and body, with the cause of death being a severe head trauma. The medical experts emphasized that the nature of her injuries pointed to an intentional attack rather than an accidental fall. Another critical element of the prosecution's case was the testimony of the resort staff. Employees recounted that on the evening of July 8th, Christy and Bradley had an argument at a social event before leaving together. Several guests reported hearing raised voices, shouting, and sounds of a struggle. These statements confirmed that a serious conflict had taken place shortly before Christy's death. Investigators also focused on Bradley's actions after the incident. He never called for help, never attempted to get medical assistance, and instead fled, leaving Christy behind in the bungalow. For the prosecution, this was a crucial indication of his guilt. However, Bradley's defense team had a different version of events. His attorneys argued that while there had been a disagreement between the couple, Christy's passing was a tragic accident. They suggested that during the argument, she may have tripped and struck her head. The defense maintained that Bradley had never intended to harm her, and his decision to leave the island was driven by panic and fear rather than guilt. The prosecution firmly rejected this explanation. The extent of Christy's injuries ruled out any possibility of an accident. The shattered toilet tank lid, the extensive bruising across her body, and the clear evidence of multiple blows all pointed to a violent assault. Forensic experts testified that such injuries could only have been inflicted intentionally and with significant force. Public opinion was divided. Some believed Bradley was fully responsible, while others speculated that he hadn't meant for things to escalate the way they did. Over the next several days, the prosecution presented its case. Crime scene photos, medical reports, and witness testimony. The defense tried to challenge the evidence, but the facts spoke for themselves. The courtroom was packed. Christy's parents, her loved ones, reporters, and spectators had gathered, eager to hear the verdict in a case that had shaken the public. For her family, this trial wasn't just about the legal proceedings, it was a fight for justice. Before the judge read the sentence, Christy's parents were given the opportunity to speak. They rose from their seats and approached the stand. Her mother, Sia Chen, was the first to speak. Her voice wavered between grief and strength. She looked directly at Bradley, who sat with his head lowered. She spoke about her daughter, the kind, loving person Christy had been, and how she had always dreamed of a family built on love and trust. Then, her tone hardened. She reminded Bradley that he had once vowed to care for Christy, but instead, he had taken her life. Her words carried not just sorrow, but anger. Then Tao Chen took the stand. His statement was brief, but every word carried weight. He said that Bradley deserved no sympathy and that he would now have to live with fear and isolation for the rest of his life. He told the court that the moment he learned of his daughter's passing, his own life lost its meaning, and that no legal verdict could ever bring her back. As the judge began reading the verdict, the courtroom fell silent. Bradley Dawson was found guilty of the crime against Christy Chen. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 years. Sia Chen covered her face with her hands while her husband clenched his fists. They had waited for this decision, but it did not bring them relief. They wanted Bradley to receive the maximum punishment, but no sentence could ever fill the void left by Christy's absence. Bradley showed no emotion. He stared blankly ahead, unmoved by the judge's words or the reaction in the courtroom. As he was led away, he never once looked at Christy's parents. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.